Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have a news video from LibertyCon's Baen Travelling Roadshow panel. For those of you who do not know, I'll just briefly tell you about LibertyCon is this science fiction fantasy book focus convention that takes place every year, and every year Baen Books and several other publishers like Chris Kennedy Publishing and Three Ravens Publishing and Raconteur Press, they all come to this this convention, and they do publishing panels talking about the year ahead. And they talk about some of the books that have come out recently and some of the books that are coming out for the rest of the year. And sometimes new announcements happen, books that we had no idea were on the radar. And so what I'm going to do is first I'm going to tell you how the panel went, and then I'm going to go through and just quickly, really rapid fire, boom, 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 tell you what each book was that was discussed and who wrote it, and if it's a new release, when it's coming out type thing, and if I read it, what I thought of it. And I am really excited to talk about this. Basically, the way this panel goes is that Toni Weisskampf, who's the publisher at Baen, sits up at this big table with some of the few other people, and she has the big slideshow projector behind her. And the slideshow shows not only the cover art by itself, but also in context with the words on it, and she shows what the books look like. And of course, Baen has some of the best book covers in the business. And we actually had one of the cover artists, Sam Kennedy, was present. And so this panel, basically, they went through about 45 different individual books as standalones or series. And so I'm going to briefly touch on them. I'm not going to give a full review or full discussion on any of them because I would be here forever. So I'm just going to kind of boom, 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 go through all of it. First, they did a memorial for David Drake and Steve Miller, who are two authors that wrote for Baen and sadly passed away within the past year. And so they talked about them and their influence and their work and all that stuff. And then they started, the first book they discussed was The Romanov Rescue by Tom Kratman, Justin Watson, and Casey Ezel. Casey was present, was able to talk about it for a minute for us. This is kind of like an alternate history sci-fi book. And then the new book in that series titled 1919, Romanov Rising, with art by Sam Kennedy, who was present in the room. This one is by the same authors, Tom Kratman, Justin Watson, Casey Ezel, and this book comes out in December of 2024. And I really like this cover art. I think it looks great. And then they talked about Dirty Water, which is a science fiction book with like aliens and portals and stuff by Tom Kratman, which is apparently his love letter to Boston. And that book just came out this past year. They also talked about three short story anthologies that are fantasy short story anthologies that are like noir focused and focused on different elements of noir. And they had Noir Fatale, No Game for Knights, and Down These Mean Streets. These collections are edited by Larry Correia and Casey Ezel, and Casey was actually present to actually talk about them. We also had some discussions about Larry Correia's works. He wasn't in the room, but the publisher talked about him. And he has his Son of a Black Sword series, which had book 4 came out last year, and that was Tower of Silence. Book 5 comes out this year. This is titled Graveyard of Demons, and it has a great cover by Kurt Miller, and comes out, I think, in November. And then the final book is titled Heart of the Mountain, which comes out in early 2025. And Toni, I'm going to basically quote Toni. She said, "It's probably coming February, but don't hold me to that." So it's coming early 2025. We don't know the exact date, but probably in the February, March, April-ish, somewhere around there, I would guess. And that series is really blowing up. If you follow Mike from Mike's Book Reviews, he just read it. I know that Matt from Matt's Fantasy Book Reviews just read it, so this is becoming very popular. We also have they talked about Monster Hunter Memoirs, Fever, which just came out last year. There's a bunch of there's like 3 other Monster Hunter Memoirs books from Larry Correia and John Ringo, but the 4th book is by Larry Correia and Jason Cordova, and that book goes back to the 1970s, goes back in time, and looks like a lot of fun. And this was a funny book that they discussed because when Toni was trying to get Jason to talk about the giant creature in the book, and so she says, "Talk about the big giant monster," and someone in the crowd yelled out, "You mean Larry Correia?" And it was very humorous. It was very funny. So that was that book. Then they moved on to someone who else was in the room, and that was Jacob Hollow. He has several books coming out. First, he has a new series titled Freelancers of Neptune, which is the first in a new series that he's doing. That comes out in October of this year, 2024. And Jacob Hollow described this as Firefly, the TV show, meets Ringworld with a cat lady in it, a cat girl in it. And that book comes out in October. And let me tell you, that is the weirdest pitch, because Ringworld, Firefly, and cat girls do not go together typically. As like, that's not like a typical, oh, that perfectly makes sense. So I really want to see what Jacob pulled off with this series. And then he also has another series that he's been writing for the last several years with David Weber called The Gordian Protocol. The most recent releases from last year are The Dyson File, which Jacob did by himself, and then The Thermopylae Protocol, which he co-wrote with David Weber. And that came out this month with cover art, great cover art by Kurt Miller. And apparently there's a lot of like destruction of universes in this book. But we had our first major announcement. There were only a few new books that were like shocking, that like nobody had any idea were coming. There were very few of those because I keep my ear to the ground and try to pay attention to everything. But the first new announcement was that Jane Linscold and David Weber have a new book in the Star Kingdom series, which is a YA series, the science fiction series that ties into the Honorverse. And that new book has a new cover art, which is we don't have a clear image of it, so I only have the kind of grainy image that I took with my phone. But that book will come out probably in the next year. We don't have a title or a release date, but it was announced that the book's coming, and that was a big deal because we had no idea. We also have other David Weber edited stuff. His Wet Price Victory book they talked about, which I actually not only read and enjoyed, but I reviewed it on the channel, and I had several of the authors on the channel. You should check that out. Just look up that book in my name, and you'll find the discussion. And then they also talked about how they're reprinting some of the older Honor Harrington books because they either only came out in mass market paperback or they came out with covers that didn't really fit what they wanted. So now David Mattingly is doing all of the covers for the Honor Harrington series, and Honor of the Queen is one of the reprints that they're doing in trade paperback. They also talked about David Weber's collaboration with Richard Fox, which is for his Path of the Fury universe. The title of the book series is Ascent to Empire. And there's two books, one that came out a few years ago titled Governor, and then one that comes out this September titled Rebel. And according to David Weber, who was in the room, Richard Fox was not present, but David Weber said that this series, this book, Rebel, has his most irredeemable villain he's ever written, which is quite interesting because he's had some pretty bad villains in his books. Speaking of Richard Fox, he also has his Light of the Veil, which came out last year, and they said a new book is coming. We just don't have a release date for it, but it is planned to come eventually. And I read Light of the Veil. It's an interesting book. I don't like that whenever they do the marketing for the book, they find a way to crap on Star Wars. But anyway, then they also had Men of Britain, A Dream of Home, which I'm very excited to read this one. Apparently, it's very much like David Drake's writing. We have the cover art for it, which looks great. I love the green color in the cover art. And that book comes out in November, also by Richard Fox. And that's the start of a new series. The series is titled Men of Britain, and then the book itself was A Dream of Home. But I'm excited to get into that. This next one, if you follow my channel, you already know about this series, the Icarus Saga, which has been coming out the last several years and months. And they talked about the Icarus plot, Icarus Twin, Icarus Job, and the new coming this month, Icarus Changeling. And then they showed the cover for Icarus Needle, which I had already revealed on the channel. And we know that the sixth Icarus Saga book, if you don't include the prequel, comes out in January. But they didn't talk about that one, probably because the cover art's not done and they didn't want to reveal anything yet. But it's coming in January, according to the Amazon. And that one was a lot of fun in the panel because Tony, in the middle of the panel, actually called on me and said, "Oh yeah, and Jonathan, he likes that the Icarus Saga, right?" I was like, "Yeah, it's great." So that was a lot of fun. They also talked about Disquiet Gods, one of the Sun Eater books by Christopher Rocchio, the big epic sci-fi, like Dune-like series that he's been writing, which has been blowing up in sales and in attention by audiences. and that's great that book is really doing numbers for Baen. Then they talked about a science fiction anthology edited by Les Johnson and Ken Roy titled The Ross 248 Project, which also has a pretty nice cover, I have to say. And that is already out. The mass market of that just came out this month. They have also Les Johnson's collaboration with the famous Travis S. Taylor, Travis Taylor writes a TV show for the History Channel. But he also, in his spare time, what little of it he has, he writes novels. And he co-wrote this series, the Proxima series, with Les Johnson. The first book came out a few years ago, Saving Proxima, and then Crisis at Proxima comes out this December and is continuing on the series. He also, a couple years ago, Travis Taylor wrote Ballistic, which was this kind of sci-fi techno-thriller thing, and apparently they announced there will be a sequel coming out, I think in the next year or so, and that was a big deal because we didn't know that a sequel to that series was coming. They also talked about a standalone novel, The Dober Snake Launcher by Joelle Presby, which I interviewed Joelle for this book, and I read the book, and I enjoyed it. If you like hard sci-fi, like everything about the book is plausible and logical and might happen, except for one thing. There's one little fiber that she had to create to be able to make the space elevator in the book. But other than that, everything else in the book is realistic. And Joelle is delightful. They talked about the Rich Man's Sky, Poor Man's Sky, Beggar's Sky series by Will McCarthy. All 3 books are out now, and they announced that book 4 will be coming eventually. This one was funny because Will actually had a title in mind, and Tony said, "No, we're not calling it that." And they did it like in the middle of the panel, and then he was like, "Oh, what about this one?" She's like, "Yeah, I think that one's better." So I actually don't remember what the good title is. Sorry. And then they talked about Summer's End by John Van Stry, which was a science fiction book that came out last year, and it was a couple years ago that it came out. But Sam Kennedy did the artwork for it, and since the author wasn't there, the illustrator, Sam Kennedy, came up and talked about the process and talked about how he did the urban look with also the science fiction look in this book cover, and he did a great job with it. And they did announce that a sequel to this book is coming in 2025. And then they talked about the Scarab series by James L. Cambias. This is another science fiction series, and they announced that a sequel to this book series is coming soon. They did not announce when specifically. They touched on a few other previously released books, and I'll go through these quickly. Frozen Orbit and Escape Orbit by Patrick Childs. They talked about Interstellar Medic by The Long Run by Patrick Childs, which is like a medic-focused science fiction novel, which really sounds interesting to me. They talked about The Moon in the Desert by Robert E. Hampson, which is apparently his homage to the $6 Million Man. And Robert Hampson, if you ever get the chance to talk to him, he is a really smart man. He's a really smart man, and I really, really like talking with him. And I interviewed him for the channel. And then they also talked about M.A. Rothman and D.J. Butler's Time Trials series. Time Trials is the first book, which is like Egyptology focused and has a lot of like space and science fiction in it as well. And then they also have Ice Trials, which is also their time travel story, which comes out later this year, I think in like November, December. They talked about D.J. Butler's other series, The Tales of Indrit and Vix. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. The most recent release from that was Among the Grey Lords, which just came out. They talked about Tim Powers, My Brother's Keeper, which I have on my shelves and haven't read. But that is like a fantasy novel. It's like a dark fantasy, like delving into horror stuff. But it's about the Bronte sisters and their brother. And they were like, some people think Tim Powers only writes, froofy, classical type books. Well, this is evidence he can write dark fantasy, and that's really interesting to me. They talked about Threading the Needle, which just came out by Mona Lisa Foster. I read that book and reviewed it on the channel and interviewed Mona Lisa. And Beyond Enemies by Marissa Wolf, with, again, great cover art by Sam Kennedy. And Beyond Enemies, I interviewed Marissa for story about a girl in her tank / girl in her AI, which I loved. And that book is already out in trade paperback. That's a recommendation. Get that book. It's really good. They also talked about Charles E. Gannon and Chris Kennedy's collaboration for their Murphy's Lawless and Terran Republic series titled Mission Critical and Admiral and Commander. And I want to take a quick moment and say the Admiral and Commander cover, that is how you do book covers. That is a gorgeous, gorgeous cover, and I love it. And that's how you do science fiction, adventure covers. I love that cover. They also talked about Charles E. Gannon's Kane Riordan series. They talked about Endangered Species and Protected Species, which both came out last year in hardcover, which is actually pretty nice cover art I like. They talked about this other series by Lydia Scherer and John Ringo, which is supposed to be a kind of science fiction-y, like Ready Player One type book about augmented reality and stuff. The first book is titled Into the Real. The second book's titled Through the Storm. They have a third book kind of planned, but Lydia Scherer went on stage. She was present at the convention, and she is very pregnant. She's like 8 months pregnant, and she was apologizing that the reason that it's delayed is because she's pregnant and she has other things on her mind and other things she's working on, which we totally understand. But someone in the audience yelled out, like, "Don't have the baby on stage!" And everyone laughed. And someone else said, "Yeah, well, it would be a memorable panel if that was the case." And it was delightful. Lydia's a great gal. And then John Ringo, who was at the beginning of the panel, he was there, but he had to leave for something, and he looks nothing like his profile picture, by the way. Whew. Anyway, John Ringo talked about his new book, or they talked about his new book, Beyond the Ranges, which he co-wrote with James A.D., and that is a brand new science fiction novel with great cover art by Bob Eggleton. Bob Eggleton always has this kind of abstract-looking pastel cover art that's really good. They also talked about Mountain of Fire by Jason Cordova, which is in the Black Tide Rising series, which comes out this October, and I'm very excited to read that. Jason has assured me that this can be read, like, if you want to jump into the Black Tide Rising book series, boom, this book will be a good one for you to jump into. They also talked about the new 1635, The Weaver's Code by Eric Flint and Jody Lynn Nye, which comes out this October. And Eric Flint died about a year and a half ago, but he had a bunch of projects in the work, and Jody Lynn Nye finished out this one for him. And this book comes out in October, and I believe this is part of the Ring of Fire series. I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's what series this is part of. Then they talked about To Turn the Tide by S.M. Sterling, which is a new time travel storyline, which is going back to ancient Rome in the time travel, and I'm really interested in that. The pitch I saw for this was, do you like the meme, do you ever think about the Roman Empire? Well, you'll appreciate this book then, and I think that's pretty funny. They talked about the new Night Watch novel by Tim Akers titled The Eccentrics, which is already out. And they talked about, which I read Night Watch, and I interviewed Tim Akers about his other book that just came out, Wraithbound. And Wraithbound is a pretty good book, and that's part of the Spiritbinder saga. And then they talked about Gregory Frost's books, Rhymer, which is based on Thomas the Rhymer, and then Rhymer Hood, which is based off of Robin Hood. And Rhymer Hood comes out in July, and it's on my TBR. I'm very excited for that. And book 3 will come out next year, I believe. But we knew that. And then they talked about my favorite fantasy series of the last decade, the Hanover series by Howard Andrew Jones with that gorgeous cover art by Dave Seeley. They talked about the 3 books. 2 of them are out. The 3rd book comes out in October. The books Lord of a Shattered Land, City of Marble and Blood, and the Shadow of Smoking Mountain. And I am so pumped. That's one of my top new releases of the year in October. I'm so excited to read that. And Howard delivered his great pitch. If you've watched my interviews with Howard, I have 2 interviews up with him. Look at one of them, and you'll look for the pitch that he does at the beginning of the interviews. He has the best book pitch of anyone I've ever seen do a pitch. It's amazing. He does a great job with it. But that is all of the books that they talked about at the panel. A few new announcements. Some books are probably going to be new to you because you probably just haven't heard about these. Let me know which covers were your favorites, which books seem most interesting to you, which books of these have you read and enjoyed, which ones of these have you read and not enjoyed. Let me know all those thoughts in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.